say the quotations that you see in a picture belong to the picture and are not necessarily imposed upon it by the artist or the filmmaker. Of course, you can impose a reference, but references will reveal themselves anyway because pictures belong to their own history, to the history of every picture that's already been made. One of the things about that film, which Laura and I were talking about before, is that because the material defined the movement of the lens through its maximum telephoto to maximum wide, it spends a long time going through nothing, in a sense, before it actually picks up on something green in order to give a kind of figure-ground relationship.
When you say nothing, it's actually the snow-covered lake.
It's the frozen lake, exactly.
Yes.
But
it could be the screen.
It reads as nothing. Yeah, it reads as kind of the absence of any figure. There's no figure-ground relationship, basically. Yeah. It's a flat. You know, you know, in painterly terms, it's a monochrome. In material film, it's a screen. So one of the advantages of working that way that Laura talked about the material setting the limits of working, is that it gives you the confidence and the courage, if you like, to do things that you wouldn't normally have, which is to hold something for longer than you're supposed to. So when you go and see both North Circular and Hendon in the gallery, you'll see they both start with very long holds, and these holds in a way are almost on, at least when I shot them or shoot them, they're almost on the threshold, or let's say they are at the point where attention, or the state of being attentive, and the state of distraction and boredom meet each other across the threshold of each other, if I can put it like that. And where that point is impossible to determine. One doesn't know when boredom is just pure boredom, or when boredom reveals some other kind of attention. And sometimes you get it wrong. But the material allows you, at least working in this way that with the material beforehand in the original films, allows these kinds of long holds to happen like they do in the Circular, which I don't think I would have had the courage to have done had I just said, okay, I'm going to hold it for a minute. So North Circular is an example of how that happens.
North Circular is, as I said earlier, it's archaic. It's an abandoned building, now completely torn down, disappeared. And so Mark has, in various works, used buildings that were in the process of demolition, and so that caught before they disappear, but the film is then going to be a trace of something which is no longer there. So that brings in a question of time and temporality that adds to the way in which his single shot works are actually axed around questions of time. What we see is a chunk of time held in continuum. And when you talk about, Mark, when you talk about at what point does boredom begin and end, one of the ways in which avant-garde filmmakers have often, from Andy Warhol onwards, have thought about film is the possibility of filming duration as such, so that duration isn't just boredom, it's actually seeing time happen in a chunk as it kind of turns slowly over. And then, of course, it's there forever. Now, I'd like you just to say a little bit about North Circular in terms of this question of the modern and as a disappearing form, or as a form which hasn't yet, by any means, lost its usefulness as a frame of aesthetic and possibly also political reference. And so the way that you've returned so many times to the once new, now old, also relates perhaps to the essay that you wrote 2 years ago, is the modern our new antiquity. What?
Good memory.
Well, except I can't remember the name of the famous
For Documenta.
It was for Documenta 2008.
Seven. know, again, I'm not wishing to be coy, because I know Laura wanted to suggest that there are direct painting references, and there is a very direct painting reference in North Circular. So
oh yes, I think you've got time.
and but again, I always think this is so important, and I talked a lot about this in that text I just wrote on Jeff Wall, and where Jeff Wall's work is strongest and most powerfully evocative is when the references, or where I feel that the art historical references are not his but the pictures, that they come out of the picture making rather than out of the artist's agenda to make reference to this painting or that painting. So I try very hard, and of course I'm somebody, as Laura, like Laura, I spent a lot of time looking at photographs and paintings, and love to look at photographs and paintings. So obviously that whole kind of historical body of work, insofar as I might know a part of it and be passionate about a part of it, is racing around my unconscious or whatever that is. So it's part of the way in which I live and work. But I try very hard not to program that. So I try to deal with the fact of the thing that I'm looking at. In which case, in North Circular is a very beautiful modernist building, a modest one, not a fantastic one. I mean, not a famous one, just a modest, ordinary, modern building that London used to have hundreds and hundreds of, and has now very few, because that period has exhausted its usefulness for one reason or another under, you know, certain conditions of capital or whatever. And but in the case of North Circular, there was a very direct art historical reference. But again, I kind of feel that it wasn't a deliberate attempt. It was a art historical reference that imposed itself upon me, and I didn't really have much control over it. What happened was that once I decided to make the film, and those of you who've seen it will know that the camera is on a long tracking shot into the building, and I had to come. I didn't know what was going to happen at the end. I knew we were going to have boys playing in the window, that they were going to be doing something. I didn't know what they were going to do, and for weeks and months, I was lost about how it could end. And then one day, I was fortunate enough to, at the Royal Academy, they had an exhibition of Chardin genre scenes, and I walked past many of them and looked at them, and the one that really struck me as a kind of magical instantiation of how this question of temporality that Laura was talking about was being dealt with in painting was the painting by Chardin of the young boy looking at the spinning top, this moment out of time as he looks at this top spinning, and it's a kind of reminder that this moment will be over, at the same time as it stresses the extent to which the young boy is not part of the real world. He's not part of the same world I'm in. He is lost in the magical reverie of this almost impossible apparatus. And then I just said, you know, it was one of those things. This is the ending of my film. I have to try and do this, and that's why there is the spinning top in my film. Although being 2000, the year 2000. Children are probably no longer as fascinated by spinning tops as children would have been in Chardin's time because of various other technologies, videos, and so on. So it seemed appropriate that my child or young man would look at it only for a second, and the only person really interested in it is the camera, because he recognizes the kind of brethren technology. I see the film as a love affair between a spinning top and a camera. That's sort of what it is, that ends in tragedy.
And both, as it were, exactly, I mean, both the camera movement is bound to end, and the top is bound to stop spinning and fall down. Yeah. No, I think we better move on, because we do want to have some time for discussion, because of a rather late start. We're running a little bit behind schedule, but I think it's very important to introduce the Nathan Square piece that's on show here, because that involves Mark's fascination over recent years. It might be over now, I'm not sure. Nathan Square might have been the exorcism of your fascination with rear projection technology, which started with rear projection Molly Parker, a piece that you made in
2006.
2006. So really between Molly Parker and Nathan Square, you also made The Fight, which is a rear projection piece. And I just think that in order to understand Nathan Phillips' Square and backstory, which is going to be shown here as part of the festival, that it's very important to explain a little bit of the background of Mark's interest in rear projection, what the technology is, and also the way that it's also closely associated with his interest in the modern archaic.